guys do. Explore what's all on their minds. Yeah, not a thing or two, or about a thing or two, about a thing or two. Mansplaining is deciding you're gonna search for the truth. Mansplain me, baby. Mansplain. There can be no thinking that would be uncool.
Welcome to Mansplaining, a podcast about the interesting things you can discover if you just take the time to learn. My name is Joe. I'm your host for this week, and as always, I'm joined by my college friend Mark. Together, we'll explore what's on our minds and hopefully figure out a thing or two about a thing or two. Mark, I was looking over the questions I've given you in recent times, things about the scourge of gambling and the chances of a pandemic hitting us. And while these are worthy, timely issues, they're also pretty heavy and depressing. So I want to throw a change up for this episode. And I had on my list for quite some time the concept of the dogs that we both know and love and how enchanting they are in our lives. And I have this like ineffable question of what is it about dogs? Why dogs? How did they get in our lives? And what is it about dogs that so entrances us? And I thought this would be a great question for you since I know you're a devoted dog owner and dog lover. So that's the question I put to you. What is it about dogs? Tell us the history of how dogs came to be such close companions to humans and what it is about them that we love so much. So really excited to hear what you have to say about this. I think it could be educational, but also a relief from all the miserable topics we've been talking about in recent episodes. So
Right.
What say you?
Well, thank you for the question, Joe. If I were to swing this back around to miserable topics, maybe at the end of this episode, I would ask you to do the same for cats in our lives. But no, today we're talking about dogs. And I remember hearing once that the reason we like dogs so much is because dogs are so good at showing that they like us. There's a lot of truth to that. And the interesting thing is that dogs didn't just appear in the world already loving humans. That's something that developed very slowly over tens of thousands of years. If the story of dogs and humans was a rom-com, it would be When Harry Met Sally. The two heroes of our story today didn't like each other very much when they first met, but circumstances kept throwing them together, and bit by bit, they became deeply attached to one another. The dogs we know and love today are the end product of one of the longest and most consequential co-evolutionary experiments in natural history. So let's talk about where it started. And I'm going to do my best to actually take you there, because the story really starts to make sense once you can picture the world in which it began. We're going way back for this one, 30 to 40,000 years ago. The place is Eurasia, most likely the open steppes and forest edges of what is now Siberia or Central Asia, though the precise location is still debated. The air is cold. This is the Late Pleistocene, which means much of the northern hemisphere is in the grip of the last great ice age. The landscape is open grassland dotted with birch and conifer forests, swept by bitingly cold winds, with rivers cutting through valleys that are frozen solid for months at a time. This was an age of megafauna. Woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses were still around. You might encounter cave bears the size of a small car. Steppe bison roamed in vast herds, and there were deer, both reindeer and giant deer, with antlers that spanned nearly 12 feet. If you were a predator, this sort of animal was your prey. If you brought one of these beasts down, it meant a bounty of fresh meat, but these creatures were big, powerful, and dangerous. Two of the notable predators in this region at this time were wolves and humans. Humans lived in small groups, probably between 20 and 40 individuals in a band, and they didn't build permanent structures. They lived highly mobile lives, following the herds as the seasons progressed. They carried what they owned, and much of what they owned was designed to protect against something. They had bone needles to stitch together animal hides into layered clothing that protected them against the cold. They had fire to scare off big cats and other predators, and they had spears and knives that offered protection against animal attack and also were key to their success in the hunt. Like wolves, their social nature enabled cooperation that made them much more formidable as a group than as individuals. Even so, life was hard. It was an ice age, after all. Food could be hard to come by. Humans in the late Pleistocene consumed a broad range of plant foods, but meat was central to their diet, and that meant hunting. For any predator, life is a never-ending series of calculations. They get calories from meat, but they burn calories getting the meat. A predator that works too hard getting its food will weaken or maybe even die. A predator that fights for its food might suffer injuries that make it more difficult to hunt and more difficult to survive. If you're hunting a woolly mammoth, you can't just attack it head on because it's huge and there's a good chance it will crush you. If you're hunting a reindeer, it's faster than you are, and you can't just run it down in a headlong sprint. You need strategy to survive. For early humans, a primary strategy would have been persistence. They may not have been particularly strong or fast compared to the other animals around them, but what they had was endurance. The physiological capacity to track an animal, push it, and keep it moving until it was too fatigued and overheated to run anymore. Human beings are among the most efficient endurance runners in the animal kingdom. We sweat, which is a cooling superpower. Most prey animals cool themselves by panting, which is physiologically incompatible with running at full speed. So you can wear them down. It takes hours and enormous patience, and it takes the ability to read the landscape, but it works. When they made a kill, they processed the carcass with stone tools, extracting the high-calorie marrow from the bones, taking the organs, the meat, and leaving behind fragments that were of no further use to them. A human camp from the perspective of a scavenger is a real attraction. The smell of blood and fat and smoke was detectable from a great distance. There would have been cracked bones that still contained calories, as well as offal and waste. And when the sun went down, there was the presence of fire, keeping big cats and other predators at bay despite all those delicious smells. So this is where the wolf enters the story. The gray wolf of the Eurasian steppe was also an apex predator, and in some ways a mirror image of the human hunter. Wolves, like humans, hunt in packs, are social animals, and live in tight-knit groups. They cooperate on complex behavior, and like humans on the hunt, they rely on endurance as much as speed. A wolf pack hunting a steppe bison would have been doing something structurally very similar to what the human hunting band was doing. Reading the prey, probing for weakness, taking turns pressing the chase, and reading each other's social signals. Researchers have given a name to this parallel. They describe the two species as having shared socio-ecological architecture. Hierarchical pack structure, instinctual sociability, attentiveness to the signals other members of the group are sending, and a bias to collective action.
But they're probably competitors out on the steppe too, right?
Indeed, yeah. In a nutshell, back in the late Pleistocene, both wolves and humans were speaking the same evolutionary language. They also both had the same relationship to scavenging that any intelligent predator does. You take easy calories when you can get them.
Right.
Hunting is an expensive investment of calories. A wolf pack fails to bring down large prey on most attempts, and every failed chase still costs energy. So when you happen to come across a pile of leftovers, you go for it. The question is whether you can get some of that food for yourself before the competition arrives and fights you for it. And this is the detail that makes our setting, the Eurasian steppe, important to the story. Back on the African savanna, where the human species first evolved, a carcass would have been the center of a feeding frenzy. Hyenas, lions, vultures. Within minutes of a kill, the competition would be fierce and dangerous. If you want a piece of it for yourself, you have to fight for it. In Eurasia, however, the range of large scavengers was different. There were fewer hyper-specialized competitors, and the cold temperatures preserved carcasses longer. In this location, and in this period of time, scavenging was a more successful strategy than it had been before. So in this context, let's think again about human camps. They are both a potential source of food scraps and also a defended space. Humans built and tended fires to keep large predators at bay, and they had knives and spears that deterred most competitors. This made the zone around a human camp a remarkably low-risk feeding opportunity compared to the open steppe. Humans in the camp would try to chase you away, but was an enticing opportunity for a hungry wolf. But they had to be bold. The more skittish wolves would have stayed far away. The risks would have seemed too great. Within a wolf population, there was a variation in temperament and behavior, And while most wolves would have kept their distance, a few had a slightly higher tolerance for the stress of being in proximity to humans. These ones pushed closer, and those individuals over time found something valuable, that this could be a pretty sweet deal if you played your cards right. With a semi-predictable food stream and lower competition, the wolves who took a chance had a reduced need to expose themselves to the injuries that hunting large prey always risked.
It's interesting to me that you're mentioning the word bold. That's the adjective you're using. I wondered whether it's actually friendliness or lack of fear of humans or willingness to be sociable with humans that brought them closer to the campfires and not simply boldness. Is that also part of the story is what I'm wondering.
That is going to be part of the story, yes. We're not quite there yet.
Okay.
So what I described would not have been like a scene out of a movie where immediately they're best friends. Instead, it probably went like this. It's the middle of the night, the fire is burning low, and some humans are sleeping while a few are keeping watch. At the edge of the firelight, maybe 30 or 40 meters out, a wolf is circling, staying downwind and probing for an opening. A human notices and shouts. The wolf retreats. An hour later, it edges back in and manages to grab a bone, then disappears into the dark. The next night it comes back, and this time it comes a little closer. No one gives the wolf a name, no one invites it in next to the fire, but with time and repetition, the distance grows smaller. Isolated incidents like this set in motion a process that unfolded over tens of thousands of years. Evolutionary selection is patient. The individual wolves that could tolerate human proximity and could suppress the fight response long enough to grab a calorie had a small but occasionally significant survival advantage. This advantage made them slightly more likely to have pups, and their offspring inherited, a little bit at a time, that same tolerance. Meanwhile, the humans weren't passive in this either. Wolves can be useful. A wolf on the perimeter of your camp might serve as an early warning system that detects the approach of cave bears or large cats long before a sleepy human would, and it raises the alarm with behavior that even early humans could learn to read. Among scholars, there's speculation that humans began to favor the wolves that performed this function well, while driving off or attacking the ones that seemed aggressive. We're not yet at the stage in the story where they were actively breeding dogs, but it was another factor driving selection. And there's also a theory that's sometimes called pup adoption. Among wolves, there's a critical developmental window when they're still pups, when they can form social bonds with species other than their fellow wolves. The theory goes that humans might have occasionally captured wolf pups and raised them to take advantage of this feature of wolf development. There are people today who breed and raise wolves as pets, and they do not bond with humans as strongly as dogs do, but there is a bit of a bond there. A pup captured in this way would grow into an adult wolf who would have been useful for hunting or protection. The main idea here is that neither species was passive. This was a co-evolutionary dynamic, each species shaping the selection pressures on the other, generation after generation, across a very, very long timeline. Gradually, over thousands of years, these proto-dogs evolved the ability to do something that wolves can't: digest starch. Wolves are meat eaters, and to a large extent, that's all their digestive system can handle. Dogs, though, can thrive on grain, and they have this ability because their ancestors were living alongside humans that were developing agriculture and subsiding largely on what humans ate and discarded. The ability to metabolize a grain-heavy diet ensured that wherever humans went, dogs could follow. Meanwhile, within this evolutionary process, and it happened gradually, the dog that was emerging out of its wolf heritage stopped merely tolerating humans and quasi-bonding with them and started really connecting with them. And this is where I think the story gets really interesting. Researchers have found that modern dogs possess structural variations in a gene region on chromosome 6 that is analogous to the human region associated with Williams-Buren syndrome, a condition that is characterized by extreme, indiscriminate friendliness and an overwhelming drive to seek social contact. So this is where we get back to your question, Joe. The domestic dog, in other words, carries something like a genetic predisposition to hypersociability, not as a pathology, but as a selected trait. Being excessively friendly to humans created a survival advantage for animals living within human society, and so it got baked into the genome.
I'm interested in the word coevolutionary. It's a little counterintuitive to me as somebody who's not done the homework like you've done. It's plainly obvious that wolves have evolved into dogs and now come in all shapes and sizes. And the long wolf snout is now teeny tiny in dogs like pugs and all. It's plain as the evidence of your eyes that dogs have evolved from wolves, right?
Mhm.
What's unclear is how humans have evolved. And if it's truly co-evolutionary, what is it that's changed in humans that's commensurate with the changes that we can obviously see in the dogs?
Right. It's a fair question, and it's a question that the literature really doesn't address that much. And I think there are two factors going into that. First is that humans deliberately bred dogs in certain directions over history, right?
Yeah.
So, like and there's my dog right there.
Speaking of which,
and you mentioned pugs as an example. There's a number of examples of dogs that were bred in a certain direction to have certain physical characteristics. And so you go to a dog park and there's such a huge range from a tiny little lap dog that barely weighs 10 pounds to a St. Bernard that weighs way more than its owner. The reverse is not true. Dogs have not bred humans, at least to my awareness. So you don't see that same sort of selection pressure in a specific direction that shows up so obviously.
Right.
And also dogs live shorter lives. I mean, the sad flip side to our love of dogs is the knowledge that dogs live about 1/8 as long as we do. So in terms of selection pressure, the generations are so much shorter, so it would show up more clearly within dogs. But reading between the lines, I would agree that it was co-evolutionary because we've simply been in each other's presence for 40,000 years. So I would think that probably the selection pressure on humans is towards the things that make bonding with dogs easy and profitable.
yes.
So less dog avoidance, less fear of dogs, greater ability to communicate with dogs. I would imagine that though that's not shown up in the literature that I reviewed, that would have been the pressure on humans is on those things that invite dogs into our lives in ways that we find useful.
Yeah, the reason that question is interesting to me is because there's different kinds of cooperative relationships between animals. You know, you think of the classic story of the little bird that's sitting on the neck of the hippopotamus, right? And it's eating all the parasites and bugs off the hippopotamus's neck. So it's clearly getting a benefit from that relationship. And the hippo is also benefiting because it's getting its parasites removed from its body by the bird, right?
Yeah.
But then there's a different type of situation. Like, let's think about rodents and humans. Right? Mm-hmm. Rats live in close proximity to humans, and they're always eating our garbage, as any city dweller knows all too well. But that's different. I don't think it's a truly cooperative relationship. What are humans getting out of this? They're not necessarily being harmed, but they're not gaining anything from an interaction with rodents. And it seems to me that the wolf-human thing that you just described is closer to the rodent-human interaction than it is to the bird on the neck of the hippo.
Perhaps initially, but let's imagine two hypothetical human bands back in the late Pleistocene. And in one, they find ways to at least coexist and cooperate with wolves on protection against larger predators and on some aspects of the hunt. And then the other band is like, no way. We don't trust wolves. We don't like wolves. Get these wolves away from us. That first group would have been more successful over a long time.
Yes.
If they're protected against predators, then fewer of their children would have been snatched by a cave bear. If they're better on the hunt, then they're bringing back more calories, everyone's healthier, they're more reproductively successful. So if you have a human population that is able to work fruitfully in ways that create protection and bring in food, then that's going to be an evolutionary pressure for the success of the genes that enable that.
Right. So if I could just wrap the bow here on this, I think what you're saying is the rodent-human relationship may seem on its face, facially resemble the relationship between humans and wolves. But the big difference is, that makes all the difference, is that humans identified something in the wolf behavior that was useful to humans.
Yes.
Whereas I've yet to see anything useful in the behavior of rats out in the back of my apartment building by the dumpster. Right?
Yeah. Or the even less savory example would be humans and tapeworms, where the tapeworm has a successful relationship with the human doesn't get a whole lot out of the tapeworm relationship.
Right.
So that's just a parasitic relationship. In the case of the tapeworm, it's a scavenging relationship in the case of the rat. But again, like you point out, there's no mutuality within that relationship.
Right.
Rats are just living on the borders, kind of like wolves would have been in the late Pleistocene, just at the borders, rushing in to get that scrap that they could get and then running away.
Right. And yet the benefit is obvious, as you point out. The proto-dogs are helping with hunting. They're helping to protect the campsite through simply being there scavenging. And we are providing food to them, so they're getting something out of it as well.
Right. So as these proto-dogs were working with humans, alongside humans over the course of thousands of years, they evolved the ability to understand not just spoken commands, but also gestures. Dogs today are uniquely good at understanding what its owner means by pointing at something. They can follow the pointing finger to a target with a much greater success rate than apes or chimpanzees, which I find just fascinating.
That is interesting.
That chimpanzees are our closest biological relative, and yet dogs understand us better than chimpanzees do. They also evolved a facial muscle that plays a role in every dog owner's life. You've probably heard the phrase puppy dog eyes. It's that big-eyed, glancing up look that dogs give us when they want something. And they do it with a muscle called the levator anguli oculi medialis, which allows them to raise their inner eyebrows. Critically, wolves do not have this muscle. And researchers have theorized that the puppy dog eyes expression mimics the facial configuration of a human infant in distress and triggers in humans a caregiving response. The dog didn't develop this muscle because it was useful for hunting or digging or any other survival function. It developed because it worked on us. It was a way of communicating to which we would likely respond.
Wow.
That's the direction of the selection pressure, toward dog behaviors that are legible to the human nervous system.
That's an amazing story, Mark. And it's also truly mind-blowing that it could evolve in such a fast period of time, 20,000 to 40,000 years. That's like a blink of an eye in terms of cosmological time,
Right. Though, again, dogs' lifespans are so much shorter than ours that, 40,000 years in dog years is, like 300,000 years in human years. So if you think of it in those terms, then traits would evolve over that time.
Attention mansplaining listeners. If you want to engage with Mark and me, you have some options. One is to go to our Facebook page, Mansplaining the Podcast, where you can leave a comment or question, check our sources, suggest topics for future episodes, or just like us. Because who doesn't want to be liked? You can also reach us through whatever app you use to listen to this podcast by giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review of your favorite episode. Or you can call and leave us a message on our dedicated voicemail box, which is 206-486-4074. And did you know that you can now listen to full episodes of Mansplaining on YouTube and check out our podcast music on Spotify? Yep, it's true. Just type Mansplaining Podcast into the search bar on either platform and you'll find us. It's lonely in podcast land, and we welcome and appreciate any feedback you might want to share. Act now, and we'll throw in a set of Ginsu knives. Not really.
And then there's oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, which is central to mammalian bonding. When a human mother and her infant make sustained eye contact, both of them experience a surge in oxytocin. When a dog and its owner make sustained eye contact, the same thing happens. Crucially, this response does not occur between wolves and humans, even wolves raised within human environments. It is specific to dogs. And presumably it evolved because in the environment of the human camp, dogs that could trigger this response in their human partners were cared for, fed, protected, and were more likely to reproduce. The ones that couldn't didn't have those advantages, and their genes were less likely to be passed on to the next generation.
Well, there's an example of co-evolutionary, right? If we're also getting the flood of oxytocin, then it's working on us as well.
Right. So when we ask why dogs have such a hold on us, a significant part of the answer is that the dog is the only animal on Earth that evolved to activate in the human brain the same neurological responses as our own children do. As far as neurochemistry is concerned, your dog is actually your baby. Over the long intertwined history of dogs and humans, there are 3 acts. In the first act, the one I've been describing, wolves and early humans were wary competitors who discovered slowly that coexistence could be more profitable than conflict. They became associates and cautious neighbors, neither fully trusting the other, but both getting something useful out of the situation. In the second act, beginning with the Neolithic period, roughly 10,000 years ago, the relationship deepened into genuine functional partnership. Humans settled into agricultural communities, and dogs became working animals. Still not pets, but colleagues. The earliest historical record shows dogs diversifying into what we'd recognize as functional categories. There were scent hounds for tracking, sight hounds for chasing prey across open ground, herding dogs for managing livestock. And this is a cognitively demanding job that requires a dog to work at a distance from its handler, reading both the sheep and the human simultaneously. My very favorite videos on social media are of border collies herding sheep in Britain. It's amazing to watch.
Yes, and my dog is a border collie mix, and we noticed when she was a puppy that a bad day for my dog was a day when family members went 2 opposite ways on a path. She didn't know what to do and was freaked out by that, and that's very touching.
And when you watch a border collie herding sheep, it's kind of fascinating because you can see the full evolutionary history there. Because when that dog is confronting a sheep that's not in the right place, it very much looks like a predatory wolf. Like it looks scary. It's got its head down, its ears back, it bares its teeth. It is the predator in that moment.
Yes.
But then also it looks over to its human for cues. It follows commands. It comes back for praise. So it's at both ends of the spectrum. The wolf end and the dog end are visible within the same video.
Right.
Also from these early times, there were guard dogs, hauling dogs, and little dogs for vermin control. Each of these represents a targeted breeding program, often centuries or millennia long, in which humans isolated specific behavioral and physical traits. Ancient Egypt offers one of the most vivid windows into this period. Egyptian tomb paintings from as early as 3500 BCE show dogs that look a bit like modern greyhounds, hunting alongside their owners, on leash and wearing decorated collars. By this time, we've come a long way from scavenging wolves in the dark at the edge of a fire. These were specialized instruments, well cared for. The relationship between human and dog had been formalized. This functional phase lasted the better part of human civilization. For most of its history, a dog was what it did. A sheepdog that couldn't herd was a drain on resources. A guard dog that didn't guard was useless. The bond may have been real, but it was structured around utility. So the pivot to the third act, when the dog becomes a family member rather than a working partner, happened remarkably recently and in a specific cultural context, which was Victorian England. Queen Victoria was, by all accounts, obsessed with dogs, and the royal household's treatment of its animals as beloved companions rather than working tools set a fashion in the day. It's a common theme in world history. When a king or queen does something, the elite imitates them, and then the middle class imitates the elite, and so it passes down through the entire society.
Yes, we talked about that very thing in the Green Lawn origin story, how the elites structure their lawns, and that became a fad, and the common people wanted to do the same thing.
Exactly so. It's also a little bit of trivia. The reason why beer in Latin America is cerveza, and in Spain is cerveza, because there was a Spanish king who spoke with a lisp, and so the elites started lisping like the king, and the middle class started lisping like the elites, and now large chunks of Spain pronounce their S's as THs.
I didn't know that.
So Queen Victoria made it fashionable to keep dogs as pets. And this was also the period when the English Empire was still intact and at its height. English power, language, and culture were being actively exported to all parts of the globe. And so the idea of dogs as pets went along with that. This is also the era in which the modern pedigree breeding was formalized. The first dog shows, the establishment of breed standards, and the creation of closed stud books in which dogs were selected not just for function, but for beauty and temperament. In the Victorian age, the dog moved from the barn to the parlor and from tool to family member.
Wow.
And so let's go back to your original question. What is it about dogs? The hold that dogs have on so many of us is the end point of an ancient co-evolutionary process in which two intelligent social predators who had a lot in common gradually discovered across thousands of generations that they were better together than apart. Over that time, the dog morphed its biology to better fit into our world. Its genes, its face, its brain chemistry, and its gut. It evolved to look at us the way we like to be looked at. It evolved to trigger in us the same neurological response we share with our own children. It evolved to be good at showing that it likes us, because that was, for tens of thousands of years, its surest route to survival. When your dog looks at you, it is performing an act of communication that has been refined over the span of 30,000 years. The warmth you feel in response is the output of a system, biological and neurological, that was built brick by brick across the longest relationship in human history. When dogs first joined human society, it was because they were useful, but now we feed and care for them just because we enjoy their company. Mm-hmm. So I think the final question is this. Did humans domesticate dogs, or did dogs domesticate humans?
Yeah, it's probably both, right? A lot of really interesting and surprising things you said in this episode, but none more surprising than the thing you said at the end about the switch from the usefulness, the mere usefulness of dogs to actually becoming beloved pets is something that started in Queen Victoria's era, which is the 19th century. My God, that's like yesterday.
Yeah.
It's amazing to believe we have recorded history from the Middle Ages and all in which dogs would not have been pets. You know, we just assume any dogs around there would have been pets, but they were not pets until quite recently.
Yeah, there are historical accounts of kings, princes, barons who had hunting dogs and were fond of the dogs. And, you know, some of those dogs would be allowed to, like, sleep by the fire at night and would be thrown scraps.
Right.
But in terms of, like, pulling a dog into your lap, you know, giving it a name, crying when it dies, you know, that sort of thing, that's within the span of dog-human history. That's a relatively recent phenomenon.
Right.
But it is interesting because you and I, our entire lives have been within that period. So we just take it as normal.
Yes.
That this is how dogs fit into society. But historically, it's fairly recent.
Yeah, it's only a handful of generations that live with that as a given, dogs as pets. That's right. Quite surprising.
Which in some respects causes a bit of a problem for dog owners because you and I both have working dogs as pets. And working dogs can struggle as pets. They don't have enough to do. They were bred to be highly functional, highly active dogs. And so if they're indoors all day, it can cause problems in their behavior and in their health. And it can be a challenge to have a working dog as a pet because the dog wants to work. And in many respects, you have to find a job for them.
Right. So I mentioned that my dog is a Border Collie mix. What breed is your dog?
She's half Border Collie, half Australian Shepherd. Mm. And my joke is half Border Collie, half Aussie, 100% control freak, because she has very, very strong ideas of how things should be done at what time of day and right. in what sequence of events. And if we don't do things exactly that way, she starts woofing at me in protest.
So when you mentioned time of day, that reminds me of something I wanted to talk to you about. You know, the intelligence of dogs has been remarked on for a long time. There are many books written about it. And some researchers think that dogs have the intelligence of a human toddler, you know,
Right.
but it's pretty obvious that there are some things they are clearly capable of. Like they read our emotions. You already mentioned that in
Right.
your presentation. They're very good at that. They have a vocabulary, you know, maybe it's only a couple hundred words, but they certainly understand what we're saying.
Yeah.
To them. And then on the point you just made, they seem to have internal clocks too, like
They
you
do.
just described of your dog. They know when it's time for a walk. They know when it's time to be fed. Some of them know exactly when their owners are returning from work, you know, and are
Right.
alert and ready at that point in the day. So
Yeah.
that's undeniably intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. And dog owners are sometimes accused of anthropomorphizing, and that's probably true. And they would probably say, well, they know it's dinner time because they're hungry. But you are right about knowing when it's time, because my dog gets a walk at 2:00 in the afternoon. And she does not wear a watch on her paw, but she knows when 2:00 is. And I don't feed her in connection with that. There's nothing that would necessarily tell her, but she knows when it's 2:00, because if I'm not walking her, then she's complaining that I haven't walked her yet.
Right. Yes. And then I also wanted to say something about the usefulness of dogs. I think it started, obviously, with this story you told about the campfire and the unintended security they provided by lingering around the campfire. Maybe that's the first use of dogs. But the usefulness of dogs grows as we speak, you know. There are dogs now used kind of as therapy dogs to help us with loneliness, to help people survive trauma, to help people who are anxious or have depression, you know, and these are relatively new uses of dogs as a species.
Right.
They encourage us to be active, you know. And what I'm trying to say is the book is not written on all the many uses of dogs as we now cohabit with them.
Right. Right.
All right, I have a question for you, and then I want to make one other observation that we haven't really discussed. The question is, was the domestication of dogs accidental or intentional? You know, it seems like it's kind of mostly accidental and then became intentional when we realized their uses. And I just want to, before you answer, just point out that the domestication of cattle seems utterly intentional to me. We started herding cattle because they provide milk and they provide meat, right? Completely intentional. It looks a little different with dogs, doesn't it?
Yeah. This is where we run into something that I just sort of hand waved my way past within the presentation, which is that very little of this history is documented, right? We've got some archaeological evidence, and we got a whole lot of supposition to fill in the blanks.
Right.
And so there's no definitive answer to that question. Was it accidental or was it intentional? Probably over the span of 30, 40,000 years, it was a little bit of both. Like there was some accidental thing, there was some intentional thing. If in fact early humans didn't steal wolf pups and bring them into camp because they'd be useful as guard dogs, then that would have been intentional. But there's no man or woman in the late Pleistocene writing down, this is what we did to get this wolf pup, because writing hadn't been invented yet. So that sort of thing just doesn't show up in the record.
Right.
And it's kind of a matter of opinion or supposition. It's hypothetical either way. But my guess is that would have been both.
Yes, I think I agree with that. One last thing, and this is something that's truly amazing to me about dogs. And I can't think of any other animal that has done this successfully the way dogs have. They traded their autonomy for survival. That's what it seems to me. Those proto-dogs that were wolves and then are no longer wolves and became dogs. They traded their autonomy as wolves for survival. And they were pack animals who basically redefined what their pack was.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, we're pack animals, and our pack is these bipeds, not these four-legged scavengers we've been hanging around with.
Right.
That, to me, seems truly remarkable, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I do feel like the key there is they were pack animals. that they already had the biological or neurological structures to connect socially with other animals. And I'm reminded of this video I saw once of how guard dogs are raised within this tribe in Africa. And it's not the way you would imagine. There's no actual training. They take the puppy, they move the puppy out to where the cattle are locked up, and they just leave it there. That's where the dog gets its food. That's where it gets its water. It stays among the herd and starts to think of the herd as its pack. And then if a predator approaches, it barks and warns the humans to come out and chase off the predator. And so it plugs into the way that dogs are wired, that the creatures around it are its people. And it's always struck me as interesting when I'm at a dog park, and that you have dogs who are intensely bonded to their human owners, and yet also see a kinship with other dogs, right?
Right.
Like they know that dogs are dogs, and
right.
that they've got something in common.
Right.
But they connect with those dogs so differently than they do with their human owners. Like they connect with dogs in terms of chasing and rivalry and rough play, and they do none of that with their humans. They're able to maintain both of those things in their mind at the same time of I am connected with these dogs and I am connected with these humans, but the two types of connections are very different. And I've always been fascinated, like how the dog experiences that difference, where it sees kinship in two directions, but different kinds of kinship.
Yeah. And I guess to just follow my thought through to its logical conclusion, I couldn't picture a human being separated from the human family pack and just put in a pen with dogs. And then I don't see as happy an ending there, right? The human may learn to identify the dog pack as its own, and the dog pack may accept the human, and there might be cooperative benefits from that. But it just seems to me they would not cede their autonomy as readily as dogs do to thrive inside a different pack like that.
Yeah.
Do you think, even with 20,000 years of conditioning, do you think that would happen?
I think that any child who is in a social group is going to bond with that social group and think of that as home and not want to leave that, right, because that's what they know and that's what they feel safe within. And whether that's white children who are raised by Native Americans not wanting to leave the tribe, or it's the hypothetical child who's raised by wolves and doesn't want to return to human society, I think once you've created the bond and you feel safe there, that's where you're going to want to stay. I believe that psychologically, that's where you gravitate towards safety rather than some presumed sense of this is where I truly belong.
I guess you may be right. Yeah, especially if you then allow 20,000 years of that to take place. Maybe this is me anthropomorphizing now. It's hard for me to imagine humans pulling off this incredible feat that dogs pulled off by reassociating themselves as pack animals in a pack that is not their species.
Yeah.
It just seems a remarkable achievement to me.
Yeah.
But maybe we're capable of that too.
Yeah, or it could be that that's just one of the ingrained talents of dogs, is that they're good at certain things, and one of those things turned out to be they're really good at connecting organically and persistently with human beings.
Yes. All right. Well, that was a really interesting conversation, Mark. Thank you. And I hope it was uplifting for you.
This definitely was a fun one to research. Like, I came across so many interesting things, some of which didn't even make it into the presentation. Like this one bit that I heard, like similar connections between humans and animals elsewhere in the world, where there is a type of bird, I believe in New Guinea, that feeds on honey, but it doesn't want to be stung by the bees. So it goes and it finds humans and it leads them to the beehive. So the humans will open up the hive, and the bird gets some of the honey. And so, again, mutually beneficial relationship. The humans get the honey because the bird shows them where to go, and the bird gets the leftovers.
Right.
And that sort of thing just puts a smile on my face.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so one brief programming note before we leave this episode. Mark and I are not just going to tease you with these stories about our dogs. We're going to post photographs of our dogs on our Facebook page for this episode. I think that's a fitting capper. And we encourage you to post in your comments, post pictures of your dogs as well.
Indeed. So are you ready for the question for next time?
I am ready.
Okay, so earlier this week, I was listening to a podcast in which the host was discussing the habit in today's media of catastrophizing. Alarmingly negative headlines are the ones that draw most clicks, and so many news organizations double down on reporting bad things as catastrophic in order to increase their audience. That would be a good topic for an episode, but this time I want to focus on one specific example, the doomsday clock. This is that clock whose hands move closer to midnight every time the world is judged to have moved closer to annihilation.
Yes.
Recently, I heard that the hands had once again moved closer to midnight, which is a recurrence of something I've heard many times in my lifetime. We keep getting closer to our doom, or so the clock would have us believe. What I don't know is who decides what time it is on this make-believe clock, what method or standards they use in doing so, and whether the clock serves any real purpose other than making people feel anxious about the state of the world. So, Joe, please tell me the story of the doomsday clock. Who is in charge of it? How its time is determined? What they believe they are accomplishing in doing so? And whether in the final judgment the doomsday clock has had any real impact on the world aside from generating alarming headlines.
Interesting question, Mark. Yeah, I will look into that. While you were asking it, I was thinking the fact that we keep getting closer to midnight and then a little bit further away and then closer and further away, it almost seems like the doomsday clock maker who cried wolf, right?
Yes.
Which ties it up with today's episode, since crying wolf is... Right?
Yeah, it does. And that was actually a point that was made in the podcast I was listening to, is that if you keep reporting catastrophic events, every time you're reporting something bad, you frame it as catastrophic. Maybe one of the outcomes is that people stop registering any headline that doesn't feel catastrophic, like they're only attuned to catastrophe.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I feel like this is possibly an example of that, of taking a bad situation and describing it as catastrophic, as doomsday. It's right there in the title. I'm sure it's well-intentioned, but I'm wondering if it's really objectively had any particular impact on us over the decades that they've been doing this.
Yeah, and also whether it would inadvertently kind of normalize the imminence of doom and make it not feel as bad as perhaps it should feel if indeed it's true. So.
Yeah. Or like some of what I've been feeling about climate change reporting is that if it's reported as inevitable, then you just throw up your hands and you don't try to do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will get on that, and I will come back in a couple of weeks and tell everybody what it is about the doomsday clock that we should or shouldn't be worried about. But for now, that's the end of this episode. We do hope you will check out our Facebook page to see the pictures of our beautiful dogs and add your own dog photos to that page. But until next time, that was Mark, and I'm Joe, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you then.
Back in the late Pleistocene, things were pretty grim when a very hungry wolf went way out on a limb. He traded his autonomy for scraps of mammoth steak. It was just about the best career move a predator could make. Now it's millennia later, and the wolf's genetic kin is my designer doggy with a snout pushed in. I'm totally at the mercy of his puppy dog eyes. No defenses as he sends me on these oxytocin highs. What is it about dogs? Is it not truly wild that I treat this scavenger like my firstborn child? It's a bond-defying logic, a rapport that never passes, considering always chewing on my sneakers as I'm writing down this poem. He's the weirdest, grossest roommate that I'm ever gonna know. He wags his tail, takes me for walks. He knows when to lick my face. Oh Lord, back when we first connected, it was a day of perfect grace. He stares at me while pooping, like we're sharing something deep. He'll slobber up some cat puke and then come kiss me in my sleep. But if reincarnation's real, when this life is over and done, I hope somehow in future lives we'll be walking in the sun. What is it about dogs? Ain't it kind of perverse that he does what should repel me, but I only love him worse? He sheds upon the furniture, his drool flows in shiny rivers. And when he shakes his coat, I'll find his hair mixed in my dinner. So tell me why my heart sings when he slobbers and he slithers. Maybe love was never clean or dignified or neat. Maybe true devotion's letting muddy footprints stain the sheets. Maybe every noble feeling is biology in disguise, a chemical reaction set off by puppy dog eyes. The poets write of roses and mystically linked hearts, but my beloved spins in circles and licks his private parts. And somehow that just makes me love him all the more. Like every gross absurdity just unlocks another door. What is it about dogs? What is it about dogs? I am begging for an answer. I am begging for an answer. How evolution turned these weirdos into fuzzy little charmers. They roll in stuff that's stinky and drink from the toilet when they're able, then rest their precious angel heads right on the dinner table. And still I call him sweetie boy and my furry little darling. How could it be so gross and crude, also be so very charming? He's disgusting, yes, I said it, but I love him beyond all measure. And I guess that's what devotion is, a gross, transcendent treasure.
Mansplaining is brought to you by Joe and Mark and nobody else. Music composed and performed by the Mansplaining House Band. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we'll see you next time.